Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
Scupper was snoring so loud in the truck I almost didn't want to wake him, one paw twitching like he was chasing seagulls in his sleep. I stood outside the glass doors of Dwyer and Klein, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, staring at my own reflection like I was about to be sentenced. I was 37, a structural designer out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Spent my days sketching marina walkways and dock systems, nights playing drums at some dive bar 3 nights a week. I hadn't worn a tie since my sister's wedding and wasn't about to start now, even for a will reading. Inside, it was all clean tile and quiet tension. My grandfather, Raymond Nolan, yeah, that Nolan, built Nolan Marine and Yacht Works from a cove and a stack of lumber back in the 50s. He died in late March 2021. Heart just quit while he was sanding a handrail, they said. Left the whole town whispering who'd get the keys. Victor walked in 10 minutes late like he owned the air. That was Granddad's older brother. He brought Paula, his ice queen of a wife, and their adult kids, Colin, Jared, and Lena. The whole lineup looked like they were posing for a yacht club brochure. Colin in leather loafers, Jared with a Rolex. I'm pretty sure he didn't buy himself. And Lena clutching some designer bag like it was a rescue dog. Ethan Dwyer, the estate lawyer, cleared his throat and got down to it. "I'll keep this brief," he said, like it was mercy. "The will names Dexter Nolan as primary heir to the company and personal estate contingent upon a condition." I didn't breathe. Victor raised one eyebrow. Paula crossed her legs real slow. Ethan continued. "Dexter is to complete a 28-day stay at Raymond's original cabin and workshop at Scallop Reach, with no cash, no phone, no outside contact of any kind. Passive listening devices, weather radio, AM, are permitted. No visitors. No leaving the property. Failure to complete the stay transfers inheritance to Victor Nolan." That's when I saw it. Victor didn't smile. Not really. But he looked at me the way a cat looks at a bird with a limp wing. Paula leaned in and squeezed my arm. "Kiddo," she said, "you sure this is your thing?" There's no shame in passing it along. Her nails dug just a little, felt like spit on my neck. "Who's checking on me?" I asked. "Victor and Paula," Ethan said, "authorized to conduct weekly verification. They're not allowed to interfere. Just confirm you're still compliant. Dog allowed?" Ethan blinked. "The will doesn't prohibit animals." Scupper, still passed out in the truck, yawned so wide I swear I could see his tonsils. I took that as a yes. Quick note. Before we start, share in the comments how's your day going and where are you joining from. And let's continue. We left that afternoon. Ethan drove me and Scupper up Route 1, then down a busted dirt road lined with spruce and sea stink. Wind came off the bay like a slap, gulls looping overhead. At the end of the track was a chain gate with a brass tag, Gray Hook Shed. The cabin sat a few feet above high tide, gray as driftwood, workshop doors flung wide to a tiny apron of water. 3 beat-up boats floated half-sunk out back, 2 newer hulls under covers. Place smelled like cedar, diesel, and something older. I had what I wore, a drum key on my key ring, and Scupper circling like he'd found buried treasure. Then I opened the cabin door and saw it, a single note nailed to a load beam, paper curled at the edges. "Welcome home, Dex. If you're reading this, I know you'll figure it out. R." I stood there in the cold, hand on the doorknob, heart jackhammering like I was about to walk on stage with no sticks. Whatever game my grandfather had set up, it was already moving. And now, I was in it. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the smell, cedar and dust, with a sharp note of old oil and something almost like rope mildew. No power, no heat, no water from the tap. The place had been sealed up for God knows how long, and it felt like the air inside had turned thick with silence. I cracked open the front windows, then the side louvers, and let the ocean wind whip through. Scupper bolted in ahead of me, tail up like a radar dish, and immediately curled himself into a coiled dock line like it was handpicked just for him. Guy looked so damn proud of himself I didn't have the heart to move him. I made a sweep through the main room and into the shop behind it. The wood stove was half full of cold ash, 3 inches deep, maybe 4, and some charcoal chunks still wedged between the grate bars. A shovel leaned against the side, rusted but usable. I scooped it out, stacked kindling from a dry crate under the bench, and got it going with half a matchbook I found duct taped to the back of a light switch panel. The whole time I worked, I could hear the pier groaning with the tide like the bones of the place were still adjusting to me being there. A bell buoy out in the cove clanged every few minutes. 3 chimes, pause, 2, then 3 again. Same odd rhythm each time. I caught myself tapping it back on the stove with the butt of a drumstick I'd stashed in my hoodie pocket. Pure habit. My hands still needed rhythm when my brain was trying to process something big. Hunger crept up fast, sharp behind the ribs. I checked every cabinet and locker I could find. Most were empty except one with a bundle of contractor trash bags, a fresh box of matches, and a steel thermos wrapped in fish tape and held closed with a rubber band like some DIY emergency kit. Inside the thermos was jerky, solid as anchor chain, but clean. No mold, no stink, just dry beef. I cracked a piece between my teeth and chewed until my jaw ached. Around the neck of the thermos hung a little brass tag, stamped 5/8, and on the bottom, written in faded Sharpie, "Never leave a good man without a meal." The old man knew I'd come hungry. I smiled with my mouth full, which wasn't smart considering the toughness of the jerky, but I couldn't help it. Under the bench vise, tucked behind a heavy crate of rusted cleats, I found a duct-taped pouch. Inside, a handful of freshwater tablets, a hand-crank headlamp, and a folded paper with a rough pencil sketch of the shop layout. An X was marked in the back corner of the building, just aft of the bulkhead wall. I followed it, tapped the boards until one clicked hollow, took a screwdriver and pried it up. Underneath, wrapped in a bandana, was a mason jar. Inside, dry and safe, was a torn scrap of notebook paper. "Start with knots you can trust. Then listen to the mast at dusk." I read it twice, then looked around like maybe there'd be a follow-up. There wasn't. Scupper came padding over, dropped down at my knee, and stared at me while I chewed through the second chunk of jerky. His ears perked every time the buoy clanged, like he knew something about the rhythm too. I fed him the last bite, then leaned back against the workbench while the stove started to kick real heat. The cove outside stayed quiet, except for the slow lap of the tide and the wooden groan of the dock pushing against its pins. It wasn't cozy, but it wasn't death. At dusk, the wind picked up and the halyards on one of the bare masts outside started tapping like a metronome. Something about it locked into me. I grabbed a scrap of sandpaper off the bench, sat near the open window, and scribbled the rhythm out as dots and dashes the way I'd done in studios 100 times, tapping out cues to myself on snare heads or coffee cans. Morse code, starboard locker, cleat code. That's what it spelled out. I barked a laugh out loud before I could help it. "Jesus, you're playing games with me," I muttered. Scupper raised one eyebrow like he agreed. The starboard locker on the dock was just where it should be. Metal lid, 4 cleats bolted to the top in a square. Looked like nothing, but I knew a puzzle box when I saw one. The 5/8 from the thermos tag, the 323 from the buoy. Put them together, 5832. I hauled the cleats in that order. Pull, lock, pull, lock. A soft click sounded from under the base. I popped the lid. A false bottom lifted with a fingernail pull, and inside was a black and white composition book sealed in a Ziploc. Front cover, Field Notes, Volume 1. I held it like it might burn me. The old man hadn't left me a game. He'd left me a map, and this was just the first mile. The cover was soft with wear, corners curled like they'd been turned 1,000 times. I sat on the bench with Scupper at my feet, opened the first page, and saw the name written at the top in my grandfather's tight, careful script. R. Nolan. Scallop Reach, 1966. Every entry was short. Just 2 or 3 lines, sometimes 4. No flair, no fluff. The way a man writes when he's working through something he doesn't need the world to hear. Just himself. Storm pulled the mooring block for Hattie's skiff. Reset it with a double reef. Cut the chafe. She offered pie. Said no. Bad manners, I guess. Port rib on the Sprague dinghy's gone to rot. Made the boy watch me fit a new one. Told him, money follows good work, not noise. Went up the bluff to think. Tired of feeling like I'm behind a wall. The water doesn't lie to you. Victor does that one hit like a jab. The writing was calm, but the line came in hot. He must have only been 19, maybe 20. Still, you could hear it. Victor was already pulling shortcuts, already casting shadows. The cove was everywhere in that book. The way the wind leaned, how the tides ran like a second clock, how storms taught you faster than teachers ever could. Scallop Reach teaches if you listen, he wrote, and it punishes if you don't. I flipped through the pages slowly, trying not to miss anything. Then about 2/3 in, I found it. A page with an old inlet map glued to it. Smelled like rubber cement and mildew. But behind it, pressed under the map paper, was a faint pencil rubbing. I peeled the edge back just enough to see the shape, a dime glued under the page. A little note on the back in barely there script. If you found this, you listened. That made my chest tighten. I sat still, one hand on the page, and the other resting on Scupper's back. He blinked up at me like, well, you gonna follow it or what? The last line in the book was just 7 words. Trust what holds when it's ugly. Below it, 3 knot sketches, clove hitch, bowline, Turk's head, drawn in sharp pencil lines with short little arrows showing where tension would hold and where it would fail. It wasn't just boat stuff. He was teaching. I looked up at the shop wall. Sure enough, there was an old knot board screwed into the wall beams, half covered in dust and coil loops. I ran my hands over it, checking each capstan one by one. Most were aged the same way, brass gone dull, edges soft with time. But the second one down on the right side, that one was clean, brass still shiny, screws less tarnished. I twisted it, just curious, and felt the whole board click backward 1/2 inch. A hidden release. Scupper, I muttered. You seeing this? He didn't move, just stared at the board like he'd expected it. I pulled the board back, careful and slow. Behind it sat a shallow cubby built right into the wall. Inside was a waxed canvas bundle, tied with a bootlace. Under it, a little tin that rattled when I picked it up. I laid everything out on the bench and opened the bundle. Second notebook, Field Notes, Volume 2. The tin had a few strange things inside. An old stub of carpenter's pencil, a pair of foam earplugs still in plastic, and a broken piece of mirror no bigger than a belt buckle. Didn't seem like much. But if Raymond left it, it mattered. In the corner of the cubby was a film canister. Real vintage stuff. Screw-top black plastic. Label faded, but still legible. Pontoon 2, August 14th, 1887. I held it up to the light, saw the dark curl of film inside. No idea what was on it, but the date landed like a stone in my gut. That was the year I turned 3. The year the family stopped talking about what happened at the shop. All I'd ever heard was an incident. Never asked. I slipped the negatives back in and sealed the lid tight. Whatever was on there, I'd find a way to see it. But not now. Scupper suddenly jumped off the coil and ran toward the side wall, tail high. He'd spotted a spider crab climbing up over the bulkhead lip like it had business being there. He didn't bark, just stared, nose twitching like he was watching a ghost. When it finally dropped back into the water with a plop, he turned back like, "Did you see that?" Tail wagging like he'd just won tug of war. I shook my head. "You're a freak." He wagged harder. I used the siphon hose I'd spotted earlier and climbed up to the roof tank. Rain barrel setup, old school. Opened the valve and got it to cough up about 2 gallons of water into a bucket. Looked like rust tea. Let it settle, skimmed the top, boiled it over the stove in a steel pot, then strained it through an old cotton t-shirt. Not clean, but drinkable. The fire burned low. I sat on the bench with the first notebook in my lap. Volume 2 beside me, and the tin closed tight. Outside, the wind died. I cracked the door and stepped onto the pier. The cove sounded like breath. Soft, steady, ancient. Inside, Scupper had already curled into a ball under the table. The knotboard still hung open, revealing the secret cubby like a peeled-back page. I didn't close it. That night, I fell asleep on the floor, one hand on the notebook, the other on the dog. The last line I'd read before drifting off stuck with me like a splinter. My hard-headed brother V. The next morning, I cracked open volume 2 with cold fingers, and the taste of boiled rust water still in my mouth. Scupper nudged my knee with his nose, then padded to the door and gave me that stare. His version of coffee first, questions later. I opened the door. He went out to patrol like he'd been stationed here since '72. This volume started in 1972. Raymond was 25 then, already running the shop full-time with Victor. The entries were longer, still clean, still calm, but you could feel the edge growing under the surface, like a hull being eaten from the inside. Installed a false floor in the Agnes to hide the flex crack under frame 3. V says paint will fix it. Paint fixes lies. Apparently, client brought in a twin V with a faulty seacock. I closed it and tagged it red. Next day it was open. Must have slipped, V said. Client's wife was on board with kids. He never called him my brother. Just V. Every few pages, a little more weight, a little less room for patience. Still, there was this weird loyalty in the way he wrote. Like he wanted to believe Victor would come around. Or maybe he already knew that was a lie and just hadn't admitted it yet. About halfway through the notebook, something dropped out between the pages. A greasy envelope, folded once, with faint smudges of graphite across the front. Inside was a yellowing paper diagram of the old shop skiff, Agnes. Raymond's handwriting marked an arrow toward the bilge under frame 3, and beside it, 3 numbers written in pencil, 7/14/22. I stood, journal in hand, and looked toward the pier where Agnes sat half-covered and tilted on her cradle. "I guess we're getting wet," I said. Scupper wagged, completely in favor. I hauled the skiff off the cradle and onto makeshift fenders made of rope scraps and old bumpers. Slid her halfway into the shallows. The sun was just high enough to throw a little warmth, but my back still cramped as I laid on the wet boards and reached under her hull. My fingers scraped through eelgrass and muck, sliding past the ribs until I hit something cold and hard, metal edges, square and sealed. Took me a few minutes to work it free without crushing my knuckles. It was an old biscuit tin, waxed around the seams, still smelling like diesel and salt. I cracked the seal with a screwdriver and peeled it open. Inside, field notes, volume 3. A wind-up AM radio, still in its box. A disposable camera in shrink wrap, fresh like it came from CVS yesterday. And a Polaroid, faded but clean. Raymond at 30, holding a small propeller like it was a trophy, shirtless, sunburned, grinning like a man fully in love with whatever he just finished building. That smile stopped me. Not because I hadn't seen it before. There were framed photos in the office when I was a kid, but because this one wasn't for anyone else. No suit, no pose. Just him and the work. He looked free. Below that, at the bottom of the tin, was a flat tag key stamped P2, same as the negatives in the earlier tin. Pontoon 2. I held it up to the light and said, "What the hell were you planning, old man?" Back in the shop, I gave the radio a few turns. The whine of the coil tightening was familiar, and when it kicked on, I got the Coast Guard's weather robot, clear and dry. Then I spun the dial slowly and caught a Red Sox game on a local AM station, staticky but strong enough to follow. The sound of it, bats cracking, fans cheering, some idiot talking about Fenway hot dogs, made the space feel less like a test and more like a workshop again. I cracked open volume 3. The first line, "If you found this one, you're still working." Good. It covered 1979 through 1985, give or take. He wrote about buying the shop's first travel lift, about finally convincing my grandmother to marry him after 2 years of war and 1 year of sanding. There was a whole winter where the only thing he mentioned was resin, frostbite, and how V still doesn't seal fittings like a grown man. There was love in these pages. Love for the work, for the tide, for doing things right even when no one saw it. But also fear. Quiet lines where he hinted at corners being cut behind his back, suppliers being switched without his say-so, projects being signed off too fast. Still, he never whined. He just noted. The last few pages hit different. They slowed down, became reflective, almost methodical. Built a thing for the future, just in case. If this gets read, I'm gone. Not soon, but gone. A little ledger for when I'm gone. Not for guilt, for proof. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even warning. It felt like a farmer leaving notes on fence posts before a long trip. No theatrics, just facts. That night, Scupper did something weird. He planted himself by the pier ladder and refused to move. Just sat there, ears up, body still. Growled once, real low. "Come on, buddy," I called. "Come in. Nothing out there." He didn't budge. I shined the headlamp down the dock. Nothing. Just water sloshing, ropes creaking, cold fog rolling low over the cove. Still, he stayed. "Suit yourself," I muttered. I went to bed with the crescent wrench from the bilge under my pillow, and the wind-up radio playing the end of the ball game, low and slow. The last thing I remember before sleep was the cove settling into silence, and Scupper still standing guard, like something out there hadn't left yet. The next morning cracked open with a sky so sharp and blue it felt fake. March light always had this way of lying, making things look warm that still bit like ice. I boiled water in the same scorched tin pot from the day before and dumped a fistful of coffee grounds into a strainer I rigged from mesh and wire. Poured slow, drank slow, felt like royalty for 10 minutes. Scupper lay stretched on the sun-warmed planks outside the door, tail flicking once every few seconds like he was keeping beat with the cove. Then I heard it. A soft cough offshore, low and mechanical, like someone firing up an engine that didn't want to start. It kicked once, then silence. I stepped onto the pier, mug still hot in my hand. Out beyond the pilings, the 26-foot center console that had been tied at pontoon, two swung free, moving without anyone aboard. It drifted like a slow door coming open in wind. First it bumped the port piling, nothing too hard. Then it yawed, the bow turning as the tide caught it, and the stern swung wide toward the pier ladders, right where I stood. That boat should not have been moving. The spring line was supposed to stop that swing. "Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!" I dropped the mug and reached for the boat hook beside the ladder. Scupper went nuts, the kind of bark that means move, idiot now. I caught the rub rail just as the boat's stern hit the ladder. Not full force, but enough to jolt the whole frame and knock my knee into the rail post. A white smear of fiberglass paint scraped along the aluminum step and left a long diagonal mark. I backed up fast, breathing hard, then reached down to check the lines. The spring line was gone. Not frayed, cut, clean. No strands, no fuzz, no weathering. A perfect knife job. I scanned the ridge above the cove, just out of habit. There was a white pickup with a ladder rack at the bend before the tree line. Sat there a second, then it rolled off like it had never stopped. Colin drove a white pickup with a ladder rack. Always had. Even had that black vinyl wrap along the bed that was peeling off at the corner. I didn't have proof of who was driving, but I had something better than nothing. I ran back inside, yanked open the biscuit tin from under Agnes, and grabbed the disposable camera. Still sealed. I tore the wrapper, wound it up, and walked back out to the pier. Click. The gouge in the ladder. Click. The snapped spring line, the angle of drift, the rub rail damage. Click. The scuff on the piling where the bow had first kissed the wood. Then I spotted it. A boot tread in the soft algae crust between two slats near the propane cage. Clear print. Diamond lugs like a work boot. Too clean to be mine. I dropped the camera down to frame it, laid my crescent wrench beside it for scale, and snapped the shot. After that, I resecured the boat, reset all the lines, spring, bow, stern, and added a block-tied backup with cleats I installed myself. I didn't care if it looked overkill. I wasn't giving anybody a second chance. When I finished, I remembered the P2 tag from the last tin and the label on the film roll, Pontoon 2, August 14th, 1887. I climbed down under the pier and opened the low locker that faced the old pontoon frame. Looked like nothing, but sure enough, there was a small keyhole tucked behind the corner hinge, right where the seawall lip met the frame support. The tag fit. Inside was a dry plastic pelican case the size of a soap bar. It popped open with a satisfying click. Inside, field notes, volume, 4A thumb drive sealed in foil, and a printed label taped to the lid. Use with recorder under bench. I stared at it a minute. Thumb drive? This was the first time anything electronic had shown up in this weird graveyard hunt of a will. I brought the case into the shop and crawled under the side bench. Dust choked the space, and the cobwebs were thick enough to catch splinters. But behind a rack of clamps and a busted orbital sander, I found it. A DVR unit, old as sin, with SD and USB slots, a broken fan, and a rat's nest of wires hooked into a solar charge controller mounted to the underside of the bench. Beside it sat two 12-volt batteries with so much dust on them it looked like they'd been buried. I wiped the layer off, coughed once, and checked the connections. Still wired. Still clean. Positive lead had a reset switch. I flipped it. Nothing. I climbed onto the shed roof and cleared off the solar panel. Bird crap and moss covered half of it, and the glass had a deep chip on the edge, but it wasn't shattered. I wiped it clean with my sleeve and watched the voltmeter inside the shed crawl slowly up from 0. Scupper came and sat at the door, watching me like he was expecting a radio to start playing or a ghost to crawl out of the wires. The DVR blinked once, then again. A tiny red LED kicked on. It was alive. I didn't power it all the way yet. I knew better than to rush it. But I set the thumb drive beside the keyboard, then laid the new notebook on the table. Volume 4. It was time to see what Raymond had really been recording. By late afternoon, I finally had enough juice. The voltmeter crawled past 11 volts, and the DVR gave a pathetic beep, like a smoke alarm dying in a wall. The screen blinked awake, and the date in the corner lit up in neon green. January 4th, 1989. That was probably the last time it had been powered on. Maybe longer. Scupper sat under the bench, ears back, clearly not a fan of the electronics humming. I plugged in the thumb drive from the Pelican case. It whirred once. Then the file list popped up. 8 video files. 3 were dated 2002, 5 tagged 2013, and 1 had a label that made my throat go dry. Pontoon 2_cam 8-14-87. I clicked it first. The screen filled with grainy black and white footage. A pier, some shadows, movement in the corner. I leaned in. There, someone moving down the dock, low and fast, sticking close to the shadows. The timestamp blinked 1:12 a.m. The man moved toward a docked yacht, then crouched. Took him a minute to work the cleats loose. Bare hands, no gloves. He moved like he knew exactly what he was doing. Then he turned for a second, looked up toward the camera, and I paused it. Even through the pixel haze, I saw it. Side profile, high cheekbones, heavy brow, mouth slightly open, hood up. Face turned just enough. I'd seen that face every Christmas until I was 22. Victor. I ran it back. Frame by frame. Same posture. Same damn ring on the right hand. Square with a dark stone. The same one he wore to Granddad's funeral like it was a medal. I sat back in the chair, heart thudding in my throat. Raymond hadn't just left clues. He'd recorded this, then digitized it years later, and stashed it like a fuse waiting for the right spark. I opened volume 4 and flipped to the page after the Pelican case note. The writing was tighter here, almost nervous. Built-in locks against shortcuts. They'll always try. But if the day ever comes, let the truth wheel turn, share certs in steel case, sealed envelope for Harborview. Pontoon 2 cam was passive, never told V, didn't need to. One day Dex might see it. I had to stand up. Pacing helped me think. I looped the DVR footage again while flipping pages. One of the later clips showed 2 men arguing. No timestamp, but I knew one of them immediately. My dad. Younger, maybe 30. Hair still thick. Jaw set hard like he was about to throw something. The other was Victor, wild-eyed, pointing down toward the water. They were shouting, no audio, but the body language said enough. My father stepped back, flung a hand wide, then turned his back. A gust hit. A piece of paper from his hand flew off the pier and spun into the water. I stared at that frozen frame, that posture. I'd never seen my dad that furious in real life. Never seen him on camera at all, honestly. And now I was watching a man who died when I was 16 try not to punch his own uncle in the face. I shut the laptop and kept reading. There were diagrams of share allocations, notes about customers he trusted, and little underlined phrases. V, dangerous when cornered. Collins not steady. Paula sees but denies. Then a line that locked me in place. He'll think the company is his by blood, not by work. That was the war. Right there. One sentence. That was the whole split. Raymond built it. Victor thought he was owed it. And now they were both gone. But their fight had landed in my lap. Night fell fast. The wind came back with it, rolling off the cove like cold breath. Scupper paced a little, then circled back under the bench and curled into my boots. He growled once, low, almost automatic, then settled. I turned the DVR off and killed the panel feed so it wouldn't drain what little charge I had. Then I set up on the bench with a headlamp and an old 9.9 carb I'd pulled from under the shelf. Hands needed something to do. The float was seized, jets clogged. I took it apart with vinegar, a bent paperclip, and a nail I hammered back into place like I was confessing through work. Raymond was in my head now. His words, his tempo, his patience. He didn't leave fire or vengeance. He left method. The wind kept rising. From the window I heard the bell buoy. 3 clanks, then 2, then 3 again. That same rhythm, over and over. I jotted down the time out of habit. Then it hit me, those numbers. 3-2-3. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a sound. It was a tempo. I grabbed the edge of volume. 4 again, flipped back through the margins. And there it was, half hidden by the spine crease, just a scribble in pencil. Dex, if you got this far, set a 3-2-3 on the snare and check the plank under the kit. Order equals tag before tide. I read it twice, then said out loud, "You old bastard. You really wrote it for me." Scupper looked up like he agreed. I didn't sleep. Not with that note rattling around in my skull and the wind tapping 3-2-3 on the siding like it was in on the game. I built the kit from junk, pulled a cracked snare head from a crate marked rejects, stretched it over a rusted frame, stuck it on a folding stool, found a practice pad the size of a bread plate and duct taped it to the wall for rebound, flipped a 5-gallon pail upside down for the kick. Wasn't much, but it was enough. I took a breath, gripped my old drum key like a stick, and tapped it out. 3 hits, pause, 2 hits, pause, 3 hits. A rhythm that felt like knocking on a locked door you used to have the key for. After the second pass, the floor beneath the snare gave a dry pop. I froze. Scupper's ears perked up like he'd heard it too. I stepped back and crouched, ran my hand across the planks. One was raised just enough to cast a thin line of shadow. I jammed the drum key under the edge and pried it up. Beneath it sat a metal cash box, square and squat, painted sea green and flecked with rust. The handle wasn't a handle at all. It was an old boathook head, mounted sideways and welded into place like Raymond had made it himself in 20 minutes and then never looked back. I hauled it out. It was heavy, cold. Inside, packed like he knew I'd be shaking when I opened it. Field notes, volume 5. An old Harborview Credit Union key, marked 311, a small sealed blue plastic fob, smooth, oval-shaped, no label but clearly important, a white index card with Raymond's familiar slanted print. Don't chase them. Let them clock in. Final diary isn't here. Listen where the cove breathes. That last line hit strange. It didn't feel metaphorical, felt like direction. I set the box on the bench, ran my fingers over the fob. Not a key, not a USB. One of those hardware wallet things, maybe. I'd seen something like it in a finance thread years ago, back when crypto was still a punchline. Didn't matter. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, I heard tires on gravel. I didn't even look out the window. I already knew. Victor's voice carried through the wind like a worn-out engine. Afternoon check, Dex. He stopped at the door and leaned halfway in without knocking. Paula hovered behind him in a navy vest, arms folded, smile painted on like she was hosting a wine tasting. Just need a visual confirmation, Victor said. And we'd like to take a look at the ledger. I stayed planted. The will bars me from outside contact, not reading. Ledger stays inside. You can wave at it from the bench. He didn't smile, just sniffed, then turned like I was dog shit. He almost stepped in. Paula tried her angle next. She took one step in, hand brushing my arm like we were old friends. It's not too late to be fair, Dexter. We've all lost someone. No shame in sharing what's left. I didn't flinch. I let her words fall off me like cold rain. They left with no more than that. Just some slow turns of the head and one glance back from Victor that said I'd made the list. After they drove off, Scupper started sneezing. 3 in a row. He paced the floor, then stopped by the stove and gave it a look like he'd caught it lying. I walked over and caught it too. Gas, sharp, wrong. My chest went tight. I dropped to the floor and checked the valve. The line wasn't fully disconnected, but the fitting at the main tank line was backed off half a turn. Just enough to leak. Not age, not wear. Someone had twisted it. My hands started to shake. I shut the tank off, unscrewed the hose fully, and dragged the whole damn cylinder outside. Sat on the porch with Scupper in my lap while the cold bit through my jeans. We sat there for a long time. Eventually, I stood, grabbed a headlamp, and walked the whole path back to the propane cage behind the shop. On the way, I saw them, fresh boot tracks, clear in the wet dirt. Same tread I'd seen by the pier. Broad heel, deep lug, heavy step. The padlock on the cage was still there, but I could see where someone had forced it just enough to pop the latch. The metal was stressed, the shackle scraped. You don't break a padlock without leaving signs. But this wasn't a full break. It was a push and shut, just enough to reset the catch. Looked clean from 10 feet. But I knew. I went back inside and dug through the bottom drawer of the old parts chest. Found a cheap mercury switch alarm. Tiny bell-style setup, probably older than me but still functional. I rigged it to the main shed door. If it opened, it'd clang. Might not stop anything, but I'd hear it now. Scupper came and nudged my hand with his nose. He didn't like the propane smell, or maybe just didn't like me smelling like fear. I opened volume. 5, while the last of the light left the cove. One of the early entries was about how Raymond met my grandmother. He'd rebuilt an old Evinrude outboard and taken her out on the river with a pocket radio clipped to the tiller mount. She said I was either the dumbest man she'd dated or the only one who listened, he wrote. I liked that. Listening got me further than looks. That night I didn't sleep much. Kept my boots on. Set the alarm bell near the door. Kept a pipe wrench by the mattress. And when the wind picked up again, and the cove breathed through the cracks in the floorboards, I listened. Because he was right. Listening gets you further than looks. I couldn't shake that line. Listen where the cove breathes. Didn't take long to figure where he meant. The tide cave under the ledge at the far end of the pier, the one that always sighed on a falling tide like the whole inlet was exhaling through its teeth. I remembered it from when I was a kid, tossing rocks and daring myself to crawl in farther than the last time. It always smelled like salt, rot, and iron. I waited until mid-ebb, when the tide had dropped just enough to give me a window. Slipped on my headlamp, grabbed the boat hook, and crouched beside the drop. Scupper followed to the lip, but stopped there, whining low in his throat. Smart dog. Stay, I told him. If I get stuck, go chew someone's boot. The cave was narrower than I remembered. I dropped to hands and knees and wedged in, the sandstone wet and crumbling in places, cold air pushing out with each swell like the cave itself was sighing. About 6 feet in, above the watermark, I saw it. A stainless box, epoxied right into the rock. Flat lid, no handle, just 3 hex screws across the face and a faint Turk's head knot engraved into the steel like a signature. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the 5/8-inch socket I'd carried since day one. I'd thought it was a coincidence, just a leftover. It wasn't. The socket fit like it had been machined for this one job. I braced my boot against the rock, twisted each screw, and felt the last one give with a soft pop. The lid lifted with a hiss, like a sealed breath letting go. Inside was a leather-bound book, darker and older than anything else he'd left. No field notes tag, no label at all, just thick, soft leather and a faint mildew scent. I flipped it open. First page, personal ledger. No jokes, no riddles, no slow warm-up. This wasn't for games. The writing was all in Raymond's hand, tight, exact, not a word wasted. Line after line of dates, names, amounts, payments to cover Victor's screw-ups, payouts to clients after mishandled repairs, mentions of shady vendor swaps. Then came the ugly part. One entry read, 1987, brake line cut on F-150, confirmed. Replaced quietly. Next page. Same year, shop gas line leak staged as accident. Night before inspection he'd known. Not just suspected, known. He documented it. Not filed, not reported, just written, stored, held like a coiled rope waiting to snap. There were photocopies of police forms, still unfiled. Taped statements from 2 old shop hands, both sworn before a notary, both retired now. I knew the names, Bert Mallow and Jake Drenner. One of them, I suddenly remembered, had held a minority investor's seat years back. That meant voting stock. At the back of the book, taped inside the cover, was a duplicate Harborview key, 311, just like the first one. Under that, a second blue fob labeled in marker, Wallet Y. Next to it, a sticky note, curling at the corners, Ledger plus fob plus locker. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Scupper barked once, sharp and anxious. I turned toward the mouth of the cave, saw him pawing at the rocks like he'd had enough of me being out of reach. His eyes caught my headlamp beam and glowed like twin questions. I held up the book. Found it, I said, voice rough. He kept everything. Back near the entrance, I sat down on the sloped stone ledge, legs shaking from the crawl, journal pressed against my chest. I flipped to the last page, hoping it'd be just a summary, some final footnote. It wasn't. If this gets to Dex, it said, he outworked the noise. I'm sorry about your dad. Ask Ethan for the 2013 folder. I didn't move. I just sat there, in that damp little coffin of rock and salt air, light flickering on wet stone, and stared at the page. He outworked the noise. That line landed harder than anything else. It wasn't just that Raymond had built this whole damn maze for me. It was that he'd believed I could follow it. All the way. Scupper shoved his cold nose under my arm, whining until I looked down. I scratched behind his ears. Okay, I muttered. You win. And for no reason I could explain, I laughed. Hard, like I hadn't in weeks. Then I cried right there in the dark, the kind of crying that creeps up and crashes out like a wave hitting a rotted bulkhead. When I finally climbed back out into the wind, the cove was falling silent again. The tide still breathing. But I wasn't listening for it anymore. Not tonight. I watched the sun come up through the shop windows, light dragging across the planked floor like it was scanning for mistakes. Day 28. Everything was in order. Lines secured, journals wrapped in oilskin and labeled, propane fittings reinstalled and double-checked. We waited on the porch until the final minute ticked over. Ethan checked his watch, logged completion of the full 28 by 24 hours per the will, and only then did we step off the property. Ethan pulled up right on time. Scupper barked once and jumped into the front seat like he'd been summoned. We drove straight to Harborview Credit Union. Box 311 was exactly where I expected it. Top row, third from the left. The key slid in smooth. Inside, a manila envelope, thick with documents and heat-sealed like someone packed it for war. I opened it at the counter while Ethan stood beside me. First, Raymond's notarized letter, dated 6 years back. Neat signature, no hesitation. Next, the original corporate share ledger, the one Ethan said had gone missing after a filing transition in 2018. Then, a sealed USB drive, old but intact, and a black Pelican case stamped RN in the corner, holding an air-gapped signer and a typed checksum card. Ethan flipped through the letter, scanning quickly. Then he looked up. "He left it airtight," he said. "This gives you majority voting control, with the proxy from Drenner and the 2 silent partners." "He really made this conditional on 30 days with no phone?" I asked. He nodded. His words, "No signal, no shortcut, no screen. Let the boy hear what I heard." We stopped at his office for the 2013 folder. Inside were copies of emails. Victor corresponding with a supplier about pushing out Raymond after a fake stroke rumor. Another email laid out a plan to buy the company's travel lift under a shell LLC at 1/10 its value. That one had Colin's initials in the footer. While Ethan prepped the board meeting docs, I dropped the disposable camera at the CVS on Shoreline Avenue. They still did 1-hour develops if you asked right. I brought the prints back to Ethan, who scanned them into a folder so we could throw them up on the screen if we needed. We booked a neutral location for the board meeting, Windlass Point Yacht Club, one of the few places no one in the family had financial ties to. Beige carpet, long polished table, windows overlooking water none of us had time to sail on. Victor arrived 15 minutes late with Paula, Colin, Jared, and Lena. He was already loud before he sat down. "This isn't a real meeting," he barked. "It's a stunt." We weren't given notice. "This is an ambush." Ethan opened the folder calmly and laid out 3 signed waivers. "Per the bylaws, a proxy majority can call a special meeting without prior notice. All required signatures are here," Victor sneered. Paula stayed quiet. Colin crossed his arms. I didn't waste time. Told the story clean. No drama. No speech. I set the leather-bound ledger on the table, then the photographs, then opened the loaner laptop and pulled up the Pontoon 2 DVR clips. Victor didn't even blink. "That's doctored garbage. Digitally altered. Probably wasn't even me." Colin leaned forward. "You seriously think we're buying that you just found a video from the 80s, and it happens to show Dad doing something shady?" "You think I cut my own doc lines for drama?" I said. "You think I risked blowing myself up with a propane leak to stage this?" He didn't answer. Ethan stepped in, laid out the facts. He read from the notarized statements. Then the transfer letter from the Harborview safe deposit box. Finally, he pulled up the scan of the photo showing the cut spring line, the ladder gouge, and a boot print with a diamond tread pattern. Paula turned, looked straight at Colin's boots under the table. Colin shifted, looked away. Jared and Lena said nothing, didn't even move. The silence that followed stretched long enough for the old fridge in the corner to kick on and hum like it was trying to save the meeting from imploding. The board voted. Victor was removed from daily operations, effective immediately, pending a formal investigation. I was seated as interim CEO, per the instructions in the will and the shareholder authority from the ledger. Victor stood up fast, chair screeching across the floor. "You think this is over?" he said low. Ethan didn't flinch. "It is, for now." Victor stormed out. Paula followed. Colin hesitated, then left without a word. That night, before I let myself fall asleep, I drove to the harbor station and filed the incident report. Everything. Dock sabotage, tampered propane, suspected fraud. I signed it with steady hands. The following morning at Ethan's office, we followed the letter to the letter. Using the air-gapped signer from box 311 and the wallet Y fob I'd pulled from the cave ledger, we brought a clean, never-online laptop out of the box and derived a watch-only wallet from the X-pub on the signer. Keys never went online. We weren't taking chances. The balance read 92-point-something Bitcoin. That number just sat there. Big, heavy, quiet, like a second cove. Raymond had written in the margins of one journal that he started buying in early 2013, back when it was still the punchline of every poker game. His note said, "Because the boys were laughing, and I like to bet on good work." I didn't feel rich. I felt like I was holding something radioactive that had waited 10 years just to prove a point. We followed the plan, moved most of it into multisig, with Ethan and a trustee from the bank acting as second and third keys. Cold storage, no shortcuts. I kept one coin, untouched. I taped it to the bottom of the busted snare case, right where I'd found the clue in the first place. That part wasn't financial. That was between me and the old man. The state got involved after that. Slowly, quietly. There weren't handcuffs, not yet, but there were depositions, a restraining order, and a civil case that moved faster than Victor probably thought possible. Word spread through the docks fast. That ladder rack truck went up for sale a month later. I didn't bid. I took the CEO seat at Nolan Marine and Yacht Works 3 days after the board meeting. No fanfare, no launch party, just coffee, a new key ring, and a half-burned notepad I found in Raymond's desk drawer. We rebuilt the apprenticeship program he'd wanted, focused on yard safety, proper pay, and slow money, the kind that lasts longer than hype. I made them hang a plaque in the front hall. No shortcuts, no noise, just good work. 6 months later, I got a 3-line email from Colin. It wasn't an apology exactly, but close enough to earn a folder in my drawer. I saved it, not to forgive, just to remember the shape of it. Jared and Lena didn't reach out. That was fine with me. Scupper got older with me. Slower, grayer, more dramatic with his naps. He claimed the rug in my office like it was federal property. If I tapped 3-2-3 on the desk during a staff meeting, his head would lift like he was reporting for duty. We rebuilt an old training skiff, the kind that leaks if you look at it wrong. I named her Scupper's Luck and had the local tech high school restore her bright work. Those kids put more care into that hull than I'd seen in years. The journals, every one of them, I locked in a fireproof drawer in my home office. Some nights I'd pull out volume one and read the early pages, the ones where Raymond was young and dumb and thrilled to get an oil seal to stop leaking. That was my favorite version of him. The one before the family lines got jagged. People sometimes ask if I feel like I won. I don't answer that. I don't think that way. I tell them I kept what mattered. The cove, the work, and the proof. Looking back now, I know he wasn't testing if I could live alone or light a fire or sleep cold. He was testing if I could listen. I did. And when I heard him, I finally heard myself. If your family tried to take everything you built, would you fight like Dex did, or walk away in silence? Leave a comment with your thoughts. Even just saying the story was good really helps the channel. And if you like this one, hit like and subscribe. It means a lot to us, and just takes one click for you.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.